to partake in the distinct honor of introducing Professor John Gardner. And I want to do that in a little bit of an unorthodox way, so please bear with me. So my first question to you is, how many people, raise your hand if you are in the audience and you identify as an educator. You see yourself as an educator. How many people, look around, look at the numbers of people that identify as an educator. So I want to mention to you that Professor Gardner started his career as an educator as a part-time adjunct instructor in history while he was still in the Air Force. So it's interesting to know about John. He also was a professor of library and information science. And I know there are certainly some library folks here today. And he also regularly taught the first-year seminar called University 101, which is very similar to some of the courses that we have for first-year students at BCC, and perhaps at other places where you're thinking about developing these courses. How many people among us identify as an administrator? Raise your hand if you identify as an administrator. Okay, look around, see who's there with their hand up. So, Professor Gardner was Vice Chancellor and Associate Vice Provost, and he worked in the area of regional campuses, as Greg was just talking about, multiple campuses that we have here at BCC, and he also worked as an administrator in continuing education. How many people have authored anything? Could be a blog entry, a book, a research article, a newspaper article. Raise your hand if you consider yourself an author in that way. Okay, look around. Good, lots of hands. So I probably can't even mention all of the pieces of work that Professor Gardner has authored. There are numerous articles and books. And one of the things that I will call your attention to is that one of the publishers that is here today with us, Bedford St. Martin, is Professor Gardner's publisher. And so you can go out and look on the table and see many of Professor Gardner's books. Way too many to mention. How many people here identify themselves as a change agent, someone who wants to make change for good? Raise your hand if you see yourself as a change agent. Look around, lots of hands. Excellent. So we know that Professor Gardner has been a change agent in the reform of what it means to be a first-year student, in the reform of higher education that calls attention to all of us to improve that experience.
She obviously put a lot of thought into that, and I really appreciate that, to understate the matter. And so let me be, I guess, the third person now to acknowledge your work in organizing this and all of those on the committee. Let's see the committee again. Who all was on the committee? I'm not seeing anything very well here. Good, yeah. Okay, they're out greeting and attending to things. Yeah, good. Well, it takes a whole village to raise an all-day conference, doesn't it? Yeah. And we referenced Cape Cod Community College. They came in a bus, right? Where are you again? I want to spot the group. Okay, all right. Good. One of my dearest friends in Brevard, North Carolina, where I live, wants to move to Cape Cod, and I'm trying to understand this, but she's got a lot of good reasons, and I wish her the best. Now, we've got other colleges represented here today. I was told we got folks from Stonehill. Is that correct? Who's here from Stonehill? Okay, good. Welcome. And how about Worcester State? Anybody from Worcester State? They are registered apparently. I have a brother who lives outside Worcester in Millbury, whom I visit several times a year. How about North Shore Community College? Anybody from there? Okay, welcome. Welcome. And UMass Boston? Anybody here from there? There, I guess they're stuck in the traffic, or are they? Okay. And those are the folks that I was told are here, in addition to our primary attendees who are our hosts for this event. So we all know we're all going to work today to make each other feel welcome. And speaking of welcome, I urge you all to dial the main number for the host college. And when you do that, you get something that you get nowhere else in America when you call a college. You get the president of the college with a really effective greeting. And anyway, the great book that even college students read over a decade ago, Peters and Waterman's In Search of Excellence, argued that the most important role of the chief executive officer is to manage the values of the organization. And when you call this college, you hear a president on the phone pronouncing the values of the college. So I'm really finally glad to get here. And I've met Jack before, but to be here in this institution that he's helped build now for going on 2 decades. I mentioned to you that I have a brother outside Boston. Actually, he lives in Millbury. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd want you to know I am a recovering former New Englander. I went to high school in Connecticut, where I had spent my childhood, and because, like some of your students, when I finished high school, I was what we call a counter-dependent adolescent, which meant that what my parents wanted me to do, I wanted to do the exact opposite. So my father had a couple of world-class colleges picked for me, and I would have nothing of them. And so I went to college in the Midwest and left New England, and I never returned. That wasn't exactly by design, but when I went to college, I graduated in the first year of the Vietnam War buildup, and my draft board was in an affluent county in Connecticut that had no unemployed people to draft. So I'd gone to graduate school, and I was drafted my first year working on my doctorate, and ended up in the military and became an Air Force psychiatric social worker, and was sent to South Carolina, where I ended up did a long tour, 32 and a half years. And then moved to North Carolina about 13 years ago, where I live now and work with my wife, Betsy Barefoot, who is the co-founder with me of a nonprofit organization that focuses on helping colleges pursue what we call excellence in undergraduate education. The last professional activity that I engaged in anywhere in this area, I recall, was in 1991. And I spoke at the commencement for Bridgewater State College, then college, on the day that we invaded Iraq for the first time. And not a happy day. So I'm much happier to be here today, although my coming here today has been an occasion for me to reflect on the last time and the only other time I was in Fall River. And I want to talk to you about that because it's a way for me to set a context for this work on student success. As a matter of fact, if I can figure out how to work this, let's see. Oh, where is Sean? There we go. This title was suggested to me by, can anybody guess who might have scripted my title? Who do you think thinks of everything with respect to this conference? Suzanne, right. Okay, so when she asked me what she wanted me to when I asked her what she wanted me to talk about, she said, I want you to talk about the first year experience, and I want you to talk about college success strategies. And then I added, what's it all about? And when I did that, I was thinking of that wonderful song, the theme for the movie, Alfie. Do you remember Alfie? I don't want to suggest to you that I'm an Alfie character. I'm not. I like to say to people that I am professionally promiscuous, but personally monogamous, unlike Alfie. But the theme about Alfie was, what's it all about? And I think that's what new students are asking when they move it to a level of kind of summary consciousness. They're asking, what's it all about? So that's what I want to talk about today. And each of us, as I'm frequently reminded, has a story, especially your students. And I have found, and I trust you do, that when you give them the opportunity, your students love to tell their stories. And I know we're all focused now on becoming, because you're all accredited by NEASC, our friends in Boston, and you're all focused on becoming more of a data-driven institution in terms of your decision-making. I want to remind you and urge you to pay attention not only to quantitative data, but qualitative data. I think you can never get enough of that. And I have to get a fix on that kind of information very regularly. I'll give you 2 recent examples. 2 weeks ago, I intentionally did a qualitative interview with 4 outstanding urban students at an urban community college in New York City. And I have a blog, and I wrote a piece about what I learned from those students. And the following week, I decided I wanted to get a fix on some very opposite students. And I did 2 interviews with 2 groups of students on academic probation. How long has it been since some of you talked to students on academic probation and looked for the themes in their lives? They're all there, and they're rich. And there's much that we can do a great deal about. So to get into this today, I want to tell you a story about the last time I came to Fall River. And once upon a time, I came in 1981. And I came here to honor posthumously my first mentor in my career in higher education. And my story really became his story. And the his that I am referring to was the 23rd president of the University of South Carolina, where I had serendipitously ended up working first on 2-year open admission campuses because my squadron commander in the Air Force ordered me to do part-time teaching because he believed that somebody like me ought to be performing community service. And that got me into the lowest of the low employment rungs at the university as a part-time, no-obligation, non-unionized adjunct faculty member. And 32 years later, I retired at the rank of distinguished professor of the university. All thanks to this man, whose funeral I attended here in July of 1981. And I want to tell you about how this man started intentionally the first-year experience international worldwide movement. And that brought me into making literally an oath on a deathbed 3 weeks before he died that I would continue this work and never give it up. I would forsake any other more traditional higher education administrative leadership career to continue this. So let me tell you about this guy, and I invite you to recall your own memories of your mentors that may have helped you in your first-year experience or other key transitions in your life. But this story revolves around a location on a campus, the University of South Carolina. This is the 35th oldest post-secondary institution in the United States, chartered in 1801, originally as a college for all men, all white men, all privileged white men. And 20 years, well, actually, we were chartered in 1801, admitted our first students 4 years later in 1805. And in 1821, after several students had been killed in barroom brawls in the adjacent little village of Columbia, South Carolina, now the state capital, the faculty, in their infinite wisdom, decided that they had to do something about the problem of the student consumption of alcohol. Does that sound familiar to some of you? Student use of certain substances that they put in their mouths has been a perennial challenge of educators since we opened our doors here in Massachusetts in 1636, you know where. And I will return to Harvard shortly. Well, in order to control the behavior of the students, which has been a constant challenge for us educators, the faculty in their wisdom decided to build, I guess it kind of shows up, maybe I have a pointer on this thing, I don't know, let's see, is this a pointer? No. All right, well, there's a wall there. And the faculty ordered, because the faculty ran the institution in those days. Imagine what it would be like if the faculty were in charge now. Anyway, they ordered that a wall, I think it'd be a good thing personally, but by the way, I commented last night, I was really struck, for entertainment, I love to read college catalogs. And the Bristol Community College catalog has the most interesting, unique, and respectful description of its faculty that I have read in any college catalog in the world. I'm serious. It describes its faculty as working scholars, and as people who are learners. And the implication is then they have empathy and understanding for how students learn. But the faculty here decided that a wall needed to be built to wall out the outside culture and to keep the students inside. And the wall was accompanied by a policy which said you couldn't go on the other side of the wall unless you got permission. All right? Now, I tell you this because for 360 some years, we have been attempting in the American Academy to wall out the culture. And I'll tell you, it's been a disastrous failure. There's no way you keep the culture out. And in order to help first-year students now, you have to address the culture, the larger society that they bring in with them in so many ways. Now, this wall, I want to give you a couple examples of how it failed. And the third or so example I'm going to give you is the reason we have the first-year experience movement. The wall failed the first time we know. In 1973, they were re-roofing a building on this, what's called the Horseshoe. It's called the Horseshoe because the wall now surrounds 3 of the 4 corners of this area. The 4th was torn down some years ago for a building. Anyway, but in 1973, we discovered a shingle on top of a roof, and the shingle had a carving on it, and the carving is now under glass in the University Museum. And the carving says, "We, the 4 undersigned Carolina students, were here on the roof of Legree College, December 24, 1849, pause, dash, all drunk." Okay? So, the faculty, they had the best of intentions, but the students were still engaging in high-risk behavior. Now, why do you think the students were there on December 24, Christmas Eve? Because in the middle of the 19th century, there was no such thing as Christmas vacation. You didn't go home. College was a year-long sentence. And you didn't go home because of the geographic challenges of traversing any distance. There was no interstate highway to drive down to Charleston, for example. Okay, the second time the wall failed was in 1861. After the firing on Fort Sumter in the beginning of the Civil War, and the 263 students of this institution all resigned en masse and joined the Confederate Army. The third time the wall failed was after these events. This president who mentored me and who was buried here in Fall River in 1981 came to the University of South Carolina from MIT and Purdue. He was an engineer. And he came to this institution in 1962. And his first goal was to racially integrate the university without the use of federal troops. And he did that in 1965, 1 year after the Civil Rights Act was adopted. The convergence of these factors, ladies and gentlemen, historically contributed to the beginning of the first-year experience movement. And of course, not coincidentally, the same year we adopted the Voting Rights Act, which of course is now, I'm sorry to say, under challenge in the courts, but still very much needed, as I'm seeing in North Carolina, where I live now, where a new legislature is attempting to disenfranchise about 650,000 people through a new voter ID bill. But that's another story. The Higher Education Act was passed, which made it possible for millions of students to come to our colleges, and not coincidentally, the Higher Education Act was essentially coterminous with the founding of Bristol Community College. Okay, now, there he is. There's my first mentor. And one of the first things he did was he thought, I've got to get people ready for change. Do you ever have something you're trying to do on your campus and you know it's going to be a big change and you got to pave the way, you got to get people together, talking to each other, loosening up, peacefully, politely considering something? Well, that's what he did. He created a group of community leaders to meet with university leaders to begin laying the groundwork for the peaceful integration of this institution. And the next major step he took was we became the first major Southeastern university to ask for a TRIO grant. Now, TRIO used to mean 3, it now means 7. The TRIO programs were launched in 1965 as part of the Higher Education Act. This college, our host college, has several of the TRIO programs, I'm pleased to say. And what we did was we took TRIO, one program anyway, in Upward Bound, and what was significant about this was this man was the first leader of a predominantly white institution in this state to say that he would racially integrate the residence halls, because you couldn't get federal money for this program unless you committed to racially integrate your facilities. You know, our president of Bristol Community College, technically he has to do that, but the thought that he wouldn't do that, or that there was any choice about it, would be unthinkable now. But he had the courage to do this. Okay, a couple of years later, the largest number of casualties in any riot in American history relative to the number of participants in the riot. 200 college students gathered peacefully in a little county seat known as Orangeburg, South Carolina, protesting the continuing segregation of a bowling alley 4 years after the Civil Rights Act. The local constabulary was called out, in addition to members of the Highway Patrol. They opened fire on the students. They shot 33 of them, all in the back. 3 were killed that night. That night, I was teaching a college course in this town at the regional hospital where the university was offering courses. I was still on active duty in the military then. Congress responded to this act. By the way, there's been a famous book written about this called The Orangeburg Massacre, and adopted the Omnibus Crime Control Bill to provide riot and crowd control training for American police forces and National Guard. That was a good thing, because 2 years later, the week after the United States invaded Cambodia in May of 1970, it was a trigger for countless demonstrations, including here in Massachusetts, in Amherst and Cambridge, that led to the deaths of 6 students at Kent State, 4 in Ohio, and 2 in Jackson State, Mississippi. That was a trigger for a gathering, a remarkable gathering of college students at the University of South Carolina. I'm telling you about this because that gathering of students in protest led to my being here this morning. Because what happened was the governor of South Carolina called out the National Guard, and because they had been trained in ways to control students other than shooting them, they tear gassed them instead. And here are photographs. And when they tear gassed the students didn't appreciate it, so they went to find the president. Now, I don't know about you, Jack, but our president's office is located on the 2nd floor of a building that's not easily defended, because you can't park tanks and armored personnel carriers in front of this building. And at that time, the president's building also had the citadel, the Tower of Money, where we kept all the money. And the students set that office on fire. And so one of the long-term consequences of this here and at hundreds of other institutions is to move the money office out of the building where the chief executive officer has his or her office. Think about that, okay? Now, what happened, though, that was far more important was what I suggest at the bottom of this slide. When presidents often are faced with the crisis, why act immediately when you can act deliberately and convene a committee? And of course, you must have input, especially from the senior faculty on that committee. So that's what this president did. He formed a committee that got me here today. Well, this committee met for 2 years. The charge to the committee was to determine why the students had rioted and what we could do about this. And they came up with a brilliant conclusion that the students were angry. And that led to an even more important question and a set of analyses, which is, why were they angry? Because we were very aware that the students had entered as polite, God-fearing, traditional, overwhelmingly Baptist South Carolinians. Okay? Garrison Keillor, a couple of years ago, broadcast his Prairie Home Companion live program from Spartanburg, South Carolina, where his opening words were, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not in Tanglewood tonight. I'm in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where it is said there are more Baptists than there are people." Okay? Now, what had made these deferential students so angry? Well, you know, we must have done something to them. And so this president had a vision that if we wanted to prevent riots, we needed to rethink the first year, the beginning student experience. And we needed to create a new approach to assimilating college students that, lo and behold, would teach them to love the university and to love being in higher education. And so he revised the task, the charge to that committee and said, give me a proposal that would make our students love our institution so that they would never riot and trash the place again. The answer that the faculty came up with was to create a course. And the course became the archetypal FYE course that has been replicated at hundreds of colleges and universities, called University 101, College 101, College Skills 101, Transition to College, Adjustment to College, Student Success, College Success. They're all adaptations of this course. Okay? Now, this course, in turn, was an adaptation of a course genre in American higher education that dates to 1882. Okay, 1882. The first so-called first-year seminar was created at a little Baptist college in Kentucky that is now a public two-year community technical college. The first-year seminar in New England was adopted at Boston College in 1888. And the best-known first-year seminar in New England was adopted at Harvard in 1959. And I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. Now, what was different about this course was, first of all, that the goal was to prevent riots. But the second thing that was different about it was that the president used this as, he used it as he wanted it used as a process to re-engineer everything we did for beginning college students, teach them to love the university, prevent riots, and to encourage more higher educators around the country to ask, do you teach your students to love being in college? Okay? And if you do that, or if you could do it, how would you do it? And if you could do it, what were the results? Now, this was a hidden agenda for this president to use something that he had learned in New England. He had decided, because this was the late 60s, early 70s, to learn about what was called the human potential movement. And there was a nonprofit organization that still exists that held workshops and retreats every summer in New England in a place called Bethel, Maine. And this is an organization known as the National Training Laboratory for Applied Behavioral Sciences. And this president had gone up there. Jack, you ever done this? I want to think about it. He went up and went through an encounter group. And, he told me that they kept their clothes on all week, but I'm not sure I believe it. But anyway, it was quite transformative for him. And what he believed was that the key to transforming a university and to making it a more humane place for beginning college students was to transform the faculty culture and to provide for essentially university researchers something they had never had before, which is a set, Suzanne, of faculty development experiences to make them more understanding of and more student-centered. And his belief was that to do that, he had to create this very intensive faculty development experience and to get the faculty to work with student affairs professionals. Now, that's a heretical idea. So this guy called me one day in July of 1972, a month after the Watergate burglary, and he had me paged in a restaurant at lunchtime. And I had just been promoted to the exalted rank of assistant professor of history without tenure. And when I learned that the president was on the phone wanting to talk to me for some reason, I'd never met him, and I thought, oh my gosh, is this how they non-renew at USC, with a personal touch? He got on the phone and he said, John, this is Tom J. That's how he liked to describe himself. And he said, I'm calling to ask you a favor. And of course, I had been in the military. I said, yes, sir. And he said, John, I would like you to go to a workshop. And so as a professor, I said, well, yes, sir, Mr. President. What kind of a workshop? He said, John, you don't need to know that now. You will learn that in the workshop. And John, I will be there with you. You'll get information. He said, John, if you like the workshop, and if you perform well in the workshop, I want you to teach a course. And as a young professor, I said, by the way, that's me in 1972. And my hair was actually got longer that decade. Anyway, that's another story. So anyway, I said to him, well, what kind of a course? And he said, you don't need to know that now, John. You're going to learn that in the workshop. So I went to this workshop. It lasted 5 afternoons a week, 3 hours an afternoon for 3 weeks, 45 hours. And this president was there for every minute of it. And over the course of that 3 weeks, he adopted me. I became his mentee. Why? I'm not sure. But we just had a chemistry, and he made some extraordinary investments in my very young career. And 2 years later, he appointed me as the first faculty director of the first-year seminar at the University of South Carolina. Now, I must confess to you, I was not his first choice. I was his third choice. But this was in the era before affirmative action. And when a job opened up, a group of white boys would sit around a room, say, who are we going to put in that job? And the first 2 people he turned to were like me. They were white. Like me, they were male. But they were both tenured full professors. They both turned him down. He got desperate. He came to me. And he offered me this role in which I stayed for the next 25 years, along with some other things. Okay. So this man had a huge influence. He eventually left the University of South Carolina, returned to MIT, where he worked for 7 more years as Executive Vice President for Research at MIT. He became very ill in 1981, and I flew up to see him 3 weeks before he died for a final conversation with him. And I won't give you all the details of that, but the end result of the conversation was that I made a pledge to him that I would never give this work up. On the morning of his funeral, I started the morning in Boston before I came down here in a limo with the then president of the University of South Carolina. And we started the morning by going to the home of a Harvard professor, David Reisman. Some of you will know of Reisman. He was one of the greatest 20th century sociologists. He was also a law professor, and a lawyer rather, and he was the author of a book that became very widely read in the lay culture, a book called The Lonely Crowd. How many of you have read The Lonely Crowd or know of The Lonely Crowd? Well, it's a seminal 1954 analysis of American culture in which he argued that the United States basically produces 2 kinds of people. The one kind is what is called an outer-directed person, a person who looks for clues as to how to grow up and behave and act by emulating all the primary patterns of behavior you see around you in society. And the other type of person that he said we produce is an inner-directed person. And the inner-directed person is much less interested in what the rest of the country is doing and marches to the beat of his or her own internal drummer. And one of the things he argued was that universities produce college professors who are much more likely to be inner-directed people, which is why they often clash with administrators who are more likely to be outer-directed people, okay? Now this analysis was done in part looking at children's literature and the stories we tell our children in this country, primarily to encourage them to become outer-directed people. This preeminent scholar was the chair of a committee that created Harvard's first-year seminar and launched it in 1959. And I'd had a long correspondence with him, which he initiated with me because of his interest in first-year seminars. And we were curious about what were we trying to do for our students that was similar or different. But I think the question I wanted to ask you really is, or two really, so I say here, so if Harvard students needed to be taught student success, which they did, that was why they created this course, and that's why this course is still offered. You go on the Harvard website and you can see the catalog of first-year seminars. It's the most popular elective at Harvard, 3 credits, faculty taught. So the question then is, if Harvard students need a course in student success in the first-year seminar, what about yours? And the question that follows from that then is, well, what is student success? Which I'm not sure I would have thought about if it weren't for this president, whom I came to pay my final respects to in Fall River in 1981. Because after he appointed me as the director of the first year seminar, and I did that for 7 years, and after, well, I actually did it for 25 years, but after doing it for 7 years, I was promoted, not because of, but in spite of, to full professor. And I had to ask, what am I going to do for the rest of my life, now that I can do anything I want, truly, best job in America. And I thought, well, I need to learn more about these first-year seminars, and I'd like to meet with other people who are teaching these courses, so why don't I organize a conference? And so I did. I organized a first national conference on first-year seminars, which we held in 1982. And at the end of that meeting, we had a session exactly like we're going to have this afternoon. We had a town meeting. And I asked people, I said, what did you learn at this meeting? And what are you going to do with it? And they said, John, we learned a lot about first-year seminars, but the first year is far bigger than first-year seminars. We think you ought to do another course, but take a much broader look at the first year. Well, wow, what an idea. Why didn't I think of that? And then the question was, if we did that, what would we call it? And so I thought about it, talked about it with some people at the university, and we said, let's call it the freshman year experience. Well, what is that? Hey, I don't know. Why don't we let people define it? And we let them decide. So that's what we did. And we registered that as a trademark. And in 1998, we again went back to the United States Government Patent Office and modified the trademark to get rid of the sexist term freshman, okay, and changed it to first-year experience, which is a trademark owned not by me, even though I'm the one that created it and registered it. It's owned by the University of South Carolina. Okay, so this first year, previously freshman year experience, was about creating student success. So what is that? Well, as I say here, it can be anything you say it is. Now, one of the remarkable things about Bristol Community College, and again, take my word, I am a connoisseur of the college and university catalog. This is the only catalog in America that it contains an institution-written description of what the catalog calls the educated person. And it sets forth as the aspirational goal for the college to produce the educated person. That is an example of this college creating its own definition of student success, in effect, whatever Bristol Community College says it is. And they argue, and I would argue, that it is something that can be taught. Student success can be taught. It's a body of information, knowledge, skills, attitudes, all of which can be taught. I learned in basic training in the military that you can teach people anything. Okay, you can transform people through powerful instruction. It's a body of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors, and it's something that's learned in groups. Pretty hard to do it and I know you're trying in online education, but the jury's out right now on whether that is remotely as effective as teaching this in groups. If you do it in line, you got to create online groups to do it. Okay, and this student success concept, I'm saying it's multidimensional. It's holistic. And it's involved in everything that might make someone successful. Okay, a place to start in your own definition of student success, I would argue, would be with your institutional mission statement. You all have one. You have to have one to be accredited by NEASC, right? So the institutional mission statement is what you're aspiring to attain, and you lay the foundation for that in the beginning college experience. Your first-year college success course, if you have one, and everything else you do to support first-year students needs to be addressing the mission statement, which, of course, is hopefully addressing the needs of your students, the community, the state, the region, and the country. And the headline of the local Fall River newspaper this morning reminded us all that an overwhelming need of this community is to help students address the critical employment issues in this community. You all seen the local paper this morning? It's not good news. Okay, now, so then the question becomes, okay, if you agree that student success is a body of knowledge, skills, attitudes, how would you teach those? And many of us go about trying to teach these implicitly, but I'm arguing that they need to be taught explicitly, intentionally, that's probably my favorite adverb, as opposed to serendipitously and leaving things to chance. And definitely, you could do it. You could teach it through sink or swim. I'm hoping you won't. Sink or swim basically is wording that connotes a kind of Darwinian approach to student success, where some people naturally learn it, and the rest don't, and the rest flunk, and that's kind of the natural order of the universe. And that's historically the way we approach student success until the 1960s, thanks to the Higher Education Act. Now, I have a definition of first-year student success. And this is contained, and I should have put the citation on there, this is contained in a book that I'm the co-author of. It was published in 2000. Actually, it's first time I wrote this was in 1989, published in a book with Lee Upcraft called The Freshman Year Experience. Note that sexist term, which we modified. And we reissued and redefined this definition, Lee Upcraft, Betsy Barefoot, and I, in a 2005 book called Challenging and Supporting the First-Year Student. Challenging and Supporting the First-Year Student. And the argument was that the foundation of that needs to be a definition of student success. So let me walk you through this quickly. And I'm not arguing that this is the right definition or the best definition, but it's one that you could use to create your own. I'm arguing here that the most important thing we're trying to achieve in a definition of first-year student success is the top step on these stairs. It's academic success, which may or may not be manifested by your grade point average. My grade point average, by the way, first year of college was a .65. Think about that, okay? Think about who's in your first year classes, which of course promptly got me on academic probation. And that grade report was mailed home to my parents in Connecticut from Ohio, 13 years before the Buckley Amendment to the Privacy Act. It was not a cause for celebration in my family's house. Okay, now what we know is to get academic success, you have to have the second step below it. Because students, the greatest influence on students during their time in college, for better or worse, is the relationship they have with other students. And so to create successful students, we have to take responsibility for creating positive relationships with them, which means juxtaposing beginning students with older, wiser, more experienced, and especially more successful students. We also have to create relationships with them, with faculty, and with staff. We have known since 1980, when the first study was published on this in the Journal of Higher Education, a study done by Ernie Passarello and Patrick Terenzini, that a successful predictor of first to second year persistence, when you control for all student characteristics and you look at only one behavior, and that one behavior is whether or not a first year student interacts with faculty outside of class. Okay? When you look at that, you control for that, you find that there's a direct correlation between interactional patterns with faculty in the first year and persistence rates. In other words, if you were to organize a first year, a beginning college experience in which students had more interaction with faculty outside of class, you'd have more students in a second year. Okay? And that is an organizing principle for some efforts at some campuses to rethink the first year, to increase the interaction with faculty. All right, we know that another thing that's going on is identity development. I interviewed 18 students last week, 2 groups of 9, students on academic probation. All of them have significant challenges right now in identity formation and development. And we can't get them off academic probation without addressing that, okay? Another issue for those students on probation is huge uncertainty and ambivalence about their careers. Why are they in college? And what has the college done, if anything, to get them to clarify that during the period when they got themselves on academic probation? Since the early 1980s, there's been a sea change in the first year that has led us to be much more active in trying to promote student health as a component of student success. This college, unlike many community colleges, has a health center. It is staffed by a full-time nurse. Is he or she here this morning? No, well, they have one, okay? And they also refer students here to a physician, okay? That's as needed. That's a more active approach to health issues than I see at many community colleges. We got into this as a country in the first-year experience movement because of the AIDS epidemic. And the single health issue that has been more preoccupying than any others is not alcohol, although that certainly is significant, but it is that of sexually transmitted illnesses and the impact of those on college success. It's pretty hard to concentrate, which you have to do to study pre-calculus if you've got an STD and you're really worried about that, okay? So that led to the addition of a whole new dimension to the student success work. Another thing that's happened is that through the surveying, especially of the University of California, Los Angeles, and their Higher Education Research Institute, we've been collecting data on the fact that students do not check at the door when they register and they enter college their interest in matters of what I'm calling here faith and spirituality. Now, I don't want to verge in anything that would violate the norm in this setting of separation of church and state. I'm not talking about a conventional definition of religiosity. I'm talking about ultimate values, the things that people most cherish and decide to base their lives on. You know, the kinds of beliefs that people are marching in the street around in front of the Supreme Court of the United States this morning, okay? Faith and spirituality. So in the first year, even in very decidedly secular contexts, we're spending more time asking students to think about basic values and how those relate to decision making, and in terms how those relate to being successful in college. Big change in the first year experience movement is the concept of multicultural awareness, embracing, appreciation, celebration. Actually, the biggest change in the first year experience came with the gender integration of first year seminar courses, which took place in the 1960s. For most of the 20th century, these college success courses were taught on a gender segregated basis, because the assumption was that men and women came to college for very different reasons. Men to learn to run the country, and women for the MRS degree. And one of the things that happened in the 1960s was there was inserted into the Civil Rights Bill a sleeper clause that extended equal rights not only to persons of color, but to women, okay? And that revolutionized how we thought about student success, to the point now where, in most indicators, women are more successful in college than men. And the final dimension of this definition of student success is that the purpose of college, the reason we have over 4,000 post-secondary regionally accredited institutions in the United States, is to promote leaders for our democracy, okay? The purpose originally of higher education, as you know it, in New England was to produce leaders for the church. But they were nevertheless leaders. And that's still a foundation of the first-year student success movement. And of course, the baseline of measuring how we do all of this has been reduced to retention rates, for better or worse. So what is the first-year experience? Still with me? The first-year experience, I would argue, is the totality of all the experiences your students have. Those you want them to have, and those that they have in spite of you, okay? Or those that you try to give them but may not be executed as well as you might like. The most common use, though, of the phrase first-year experience is to mean a program, an initiative, an intervention, like a first-year seminar. That's not the way I use the term. You know, I meet people all the time, and they say, oh, we have a first-year experience. I say, oh, really, what do you mean by that? And they say, oh, we have a 3-credit course or a 1-credit course, and I, learn about that. But I think the first-year experience is much more comprehensive, goes far beyond that. I really meant the term when I first coined it as an educational philosophy, a set of values and principles about the importance of the first year. I've told you it's also a registered trademark, and I want to assure you that the first year experience is whatever you want it to be. It's however you want to define it. And you do need to define it. And you do need to be very intentional and precise about that. Now, to promote this concept of the first year experience, what we were trying to do was to change the historic purposes of the first year. You step back and you look at what were we trying to do as a country with the first year of higher education? Well, we were trying to do something uniquely American with it. What's more important than American than making money? Okay? So we were organizing the first year to make money, a cash cow, something that we would invest less money in financially and use a lot of cheap labor and large classes to spin resources to fund what we thought was more valuable, namely upper division courses. At the same time, we did this as a process to get rid of people. The first year was organized to weed out, to separate the wheat from the chaff, the men from the boys. My first college president looked at me and 500 other members of my first year class and said, you tell me what he said. What do you think he said? This is the most often quoted line of college presidents for 300 years. Look to your right. You got it. Look to your right, look to your left, and the two you just looked at won't be there 4 years later when you graduate. So here's John. He's 17 years old, new kid from Connecticut out there in Ohio, and the first thought I had was, oh, predicting I'm going to graduate. Wait a minute, John. These two kids just looked at you. You're not going to graduate. And look at this president. He's smiling. He's pleased about this. The 1961 definition of educational quality was the flunk-out rate. Okay? That's been a huge change in American higher education, finding some other quality indicator. Now, another purpose of the first year was to make it possible for me, for most of my career at the University of South Carolina, if I wanted, never to teach first-year students. Okay? But instead, upper division and especially graduate students. That's not my measure of success, although I did that. Okay. Now, in our setting here, what's the first-year experience? Well, for exactly half. As a matter of fact, I think it's 50-point-something% and versus 49-point-something%. At this college, there's about 0.5% more students here that are part-time than full-time. And that means the first-year experience for them isn't a year at all. It's not a calendar measure. So is it a credit measure? The federal definition of the first year is the accumulation of 30 credit hours or the equivalent quarter hours. But in this setting, there are multiple first-year experiences. If you're in English as a second language, if you're in developmental education, and then you move into a matriculated first 30 credits, and it could also be the transfer experience. I don't have time to get into this, at least in my prepared remarks this morning, but I can in a discussion if you want. Right now, I think the most critical first-year experience in our country, the one where here in New England, you're going to have to get better at, because the demographics of New England, the population is dropping here, high school graduates. And if we're going to sustain current levels of enrollment in baccalaureate level institutions in New England, the only way we're going to do that is through transfer students coming from community colleges. That's the only way we're going to do it. By the way, my reading of the catalog of Bristol Community College, there is more attention paid to transfer at this community college than any catalog I've read at any community college in the United States. I don't know what accounts for that, but that's what I find, all right? By the way, the focus on the transfer experience as a first-year experience right now in terms of its development is where the first-year experience was 30 years ago. Huge lag. So we have a lot of catching up to do. All right, now, there are a lot of different terms now and labels. People are talking about the first-year experience in different ways. They're equating it with student success, college success, retention, the so-called college completion agenda, all kinds of new terminology. The completion agenda, I have a lot of problems with that because I'm not sure what it means. I mean, I know it means attainment of something, but what does it say about what people are learning, the value added? Absolutely nothing. It's like we're making widgets, okay? Retention is an incredibly minimal, low standard. It's a C-. It's a pulse. It's the ability to fog a mirror, okay? That's why the nonprofit organization that my wife and I run is not an institute for undergraduate retention. You go to the urologist if you got problems with that. We think a much more productive focus is if you had an excellent first year, you had an excellent transfer experience, what would that be? So anyway, we got to think carefully about our terminology. Some basic assumptions that underlie all this work is you got to believe that you can teach students to be successful. And then you have to set out and do it. You have to believe that they're going to want to respond to this and accept it. One of the most difficult things is to say as an institution, we have to take more responsibility for student learning. We can't leave it solely to the students, which means we have to stop blaming the victim. And when we make that mind shift, then what we do is we focus on what we, the institution, controls. And when we do that, we have to reduce our tolerance for failure. You know, there's been a huge sea change in our culture. In the 80s, 70s and 80s, as consumers, we decided we were going to stop being tolerant of failure. And that's when we started buying Toyotas, Datsuns, Nissans, etc., right? And Detroit got a big message, and we all but in higher education. Because in higher education, one of the best kept dirty little secrets is the chronic high failure rates, all right? Which I don't even know how much you people know about the failure rates at your institutions. This spring, my nonprofit organization is launching a huge new national initiative on failure rates in high failure rate courses. This is going to be my capstone work. Okay, so again, more assumptions. The first year matters. I've got a button, I should have put it on this morning, that says the first year matters. The first year needs to be re-engineered. This college is doing a lot of re-engineering of developmental education, as an illustration. To do that, we have to rethink when the first year begins. And of course, we all know it begins far in advance of when the students get to us. This college has an extensive pre-college initiative. That's very important. And we know that student success efforts require a partnership. You will not increase your efforts to be successful if you don't have these three constituencies working together: faculty, academic, and student affairs administrators. Okay, I've told you this already. This is really important. If there's one thing you could do to increase the success of your new students, it would be to put your most outstanding students in greater positions of influence. And one of the best ways to do this is to develop, maintain, expand a robust honors initiative. Undergraduate honors students run the campus. Okay? They are overrepresented in everything. They are the future leaders of everything. Okay? We are underutilizing those students. We are intellectually, academically, even spatially segregating them on many campuses. Dumb, dumb, dumb. Okay? We need to be using them to influence a wider variety of other students. Okay, if you want to increase student success, I think there are two basic ways that you as an individual can think about this. One is you can ask yourselves, what can my institution do? And you can ask yourself at the same time, what can I do? I want to suggest both. They're complementary. They're not mutually exclusive. So I want to give you some illustrations very rapidly here before I'm expected to move into an interactive mode in 8 minutes. Okay, what can the institution do? Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to oversimplify this, but you need to look at your policies and practices. My full-time work is working with colleges and universities in a strategic planning process that's called Foundations of Excellence. And what we do is we show an institution how to thoroughly assess everything it's doing for the first year and to come up with a plan to improve performance. And one of the places we start is with policies. These are the rules that tell your students what they must do or what they don't have to do. And we have all kinds of rules that are outmoded, that haven't been looked at for decades, and that if you did a thoughtful analysis and you tried to even figure out when you instituted these rules, you couldn't even tell who instituted them because they're probably not living any longer, okay? So one way to get success is to rethink some of your policies. I'll give you an example. First year we did Foundations of Excellence, I visited one of our pilot institutions out in Nebraska. I had a meeting with the cabinet, and they had a rule. They said that they would not allow any student to apply credits towards a baccalaureate degree in excess of 15 hours earned in a community college. I said, okay, what's the rationale for not allowing more than 15 hours to apply to your bachelor's degree? President did not know. His chief academic officer did not know. His chief enrollment management officer did not know. The chief student affairs officer did not know. The registrar did not know. Not a soul in the cabinet knew the basis for this rule. But they were dutifully enforcing it because the rule had preceded all of their appointments, okay? They changed the rule that morning, okay? You all have policies like that. Another thing we know is that colleges that are successful have powerful rituals that bind people together. In celebrations, in things like convocations, what are your rituals? What are the pedagogies you're using? We know a huge amount now about new pedagogies, new structures for delivering curriculum, like learning communities, for example. We know that we have institutional behaviors that either support or detract from success of students, and I'm going to illustrate some of those. So you ask, what are your policies about admissions, particularly for late admissions? One of the big killers of students is allowing them to start late, okay? We think we're doing them a favor, we're really not. Another issue is who does the advising? I know a college that's about 30 miles from here that has as part of their union contract that every faculty member must advise. Boy, is that dumb. Okay? Why in the world would you do that? Okay? You have to have more criteria for who does advising than simply their employment classification. Give me a break. How about knowledge and abilities, skills, aptitudes? Consider those. Another thing that, of course, I tried to figure out reading the catalog here, and there's a little dance in the catalog about this, is academic advising required? And if so, for whom? Or can we just let people select their own courses, do whatever they want, take it as a smorgasbord? At most community colleges now, there's no requirement for advising. Ooh, that's not smart, okay? You could change that. What about placement testing? We, in a Foundations of Excellence process we did at a regional public university in Illinois 5 years ago, we did an analysis there of what happened to the students that took courses in the first year for which they had not met the placement criteria. They were allowed to take something they hadn't tested into. Not one student got a grade higher than a D. Not one. Okay? And why were they taking those courses? No space in other classes, so the university said. And so in order to keep them and generate the formula funding, they put them in classes in which they were guaranteed a D. Okay? And D is what they got. Okay, another really no-brainer is whether or not you require orientation. Okay? Huge evidence. You require orientation, student performance is going to increase. Okay? These are examples of policies, and there are many more. How late is late registration? How late in your term can students start classes? This college has what it's called a late start. It starts around September the 18th, which is about 16 days after the first class here. Smart idea. Another key policy to look at is who do you require to participate in certain interventions, like first-year seminars? Community colleges often, I think, for all the right and wrong reasons, require developmental ed students to take first-year seminars, even though those are the least likely students to benefit. Okay? You ought to be requiring your initially more able students to take those courses because you're going to have more of them longer. All the evidence suggests. I hate to say that. Your policy about how late in the term can students drop a course without a penalty? From my reading here, it's 10 weeks. So you're allowing 10 weeks for a student not to make a commitment. Is that a smart thing? Would they be more successful if you asked them to make a commitment? What is it, a trial marriage? You're going to shack up for a while before you make a commitment? A form of academic shacking up? I think so. And do you permit the use of peer leaders? I've talked about them. What about attendance policy? This college has you all ought to read the description of the attendance policy here. It's really good. I don't have time to go into it, but let me just recommend its reading. This is something that most colleges are scared to death to play with because they think if they mess with the attendance policy of students, they're going to mess with the attendance policy of faculty, and we don't want that, okay? Do you think there's a correlation between presence and learning? Okay. Is there a correlation between success on the first job after college and showing up for work? By the way, I've got a friend who's got the same last name as me, Philip Gardner. He's at Michigan State University. He runs something called the Collegiate Employment Research Institute. And he has studied why students lose their first job after college. What do you think the most common reason is why students get whacked in their first job after college. Tardiness, that's up near the top, or being late or not showing up near the top, but it is not the number one. The number,
Facebook, social media.
Yeah, that might contribute to the finding. The finding is, quote, failure to take initiative. College graduates have been told what to do for 120 hours, okay? They've been given very little opportunity to show independent initiative. And they get in jobs, and employers want to see initiative. Okay, and in this job market, you can get sacked pretty fast if you don't have it. If you want, ladies and gentlemen, I'm about out of time on this prepared shtick here. I will be happy to have the college make a copy of this available for you. Let me show you what I haven't gotten to do, and I should have done this more rapidly. I've got a list of programs that have been shown to contribute to student success, and you could use this as a kind of checklist. The first three are the three that have been most supported by empirical research for their effectiveness increasing student success. And so you could be asking at your place, do we have these? What's the status of these? And then I've got some suggestions I think you should be asking if you were to try to create a plan for student success. The big learning for me pretty late in my career has been that the programs we have, these high impact programs and practices, they are necessary, but they are not sufficient. There's no one that's going to be a panacea. That what institutions really need is a comprehensive plan to increase the success of new students. And this is what happens to institutions that develop a comprehensive plan and they execute it. Their retention rates go up. This is based on a study that we've had done on institutions that participate in the Foundations of Excellence planning process. This is a study of about 140 some institutions, both 2- and 4-year institutions combined. That means open enrollment, selective enrollment, all in one pot. You develop a plan, you implement it over 4 years, you get about a 3% retention increase. Now, what is more meaningful is what happens to institutions that have a plan of some kind and they implement it to a high degree or they don't implement it at all. And this is really stunning because what we're finding is that colleges that don't know how to execute for whatever reason, they're not able to execute their visions, their strategic visions as opposed to their hallucinations, their retention rates decline significantly. And that the key to increasing retention is to have an aspirational vision for student success, which then you implement to a high degree. Our high implementers on a 100-point scale are increasing 5.62 points, which on a percentage basis represents an 8.2% increase in retention for high implementers. But the key is on the execution. Most importantly here, well, you see this level of implementation here. The highest rates we're seeing are in private colleges. What is it about private colleges in this country that have the greatest potential? Is it because they have more consensus around their mission? They serve more homogeneous populations? They're much more likely to have on-campus residences, which is one of the strongest predictors of graduation from college. Probably all of those things. Private colleges who develop an action plan to improve retention, who implement those plans to a high degree, they're looking at a 17.2% increase in retention. Amazing part-time students in community colleges, which normally nobody can move the needle. You create an action plan, you implement it to a high degree, you will be able to increase your retention. Okay, now, I've got some questions in here which you can look at. One of the most important one is to improve retention, student success, you got to do what Willie Sutton did. Why did Willie Sutton rob banks, ladies and gentlemen? That's where the money is, okay? Where's your money? Your money's in your 5 highest enrollment courses, or your 6 or 7 or 8 or 3 or 4, how many ever you want to count. The fastest way to improve student performance at your campus is to focus on where they congregate in the largest numbers, okay? And disproportionately direct your attention to improving performance in those areas of the curriculum. That's the real first-year experience. Not in first-year seminars, but it's in high failure rate courses. Okay, now, those are things that the institution can do. Then there's you. What can you do your locus of control. And this is hugely influential. Okay, what you do with students yourself, what you do with others who interact with students, and your ability to leverage and change institutional policy. What if the faculty got together and said, we want to require orientation? Educationally, that would make sense. They could do that. Okay? Already at this college, they have been collecting data, which I learned about last night, that shows that the students who participate in orientation here are performing significantly better. Okay? They already have data to support a policy change here. Okay. Now, I would argue that all of us need to have a personal philosophy of education, that in everything we do, we're acting on that. Believe me, I don't have time to go through this with you. I've got it in the PowerPoint here, and then, which you can consider if you want. And then, in terms of what you do with students, there's a huge body of research now on what are the kinds of behaviors that we could engage in that might increase student success. And I've got a long list of them here. And I realize I don't have time to do justice to all of these, but you can think about these. Okay, we cannot neglect the staff, and there are many things that they can do well. One of the big findings, ladies and gentlemen, is that there's a direct correlation between whether or not students work during college and whether or not they attain degrees. And what do you think? Overall, the entire American student population, who's got a higher graduation rate? Students that work or students that live on trust funds and don't? Students that work. Okay, work is a predictor for degree completion. The question is not whether they work, but where they work and how much they work. And what employment base predicts the highest degree attainment? If you could have a student work anywhere that'd be ideal, where would you want them to work if you want to increase their degree probabilities? At the institution, thank you. So one of the most important things your staff can do is to supervise and promote success in their student employees. Okay? Anything you can do to expand your student employee base is going to help you improve retention rates. These are all things that staff can and do that make a tremendous difference in student success. And then there are indirect ways in terms of taking what you know about your students and sharing that knowledge with people who create policy. Being an advocate for policies and practices that might improve student success. And volunteering to serve in planning groups and committees that influence these all-important policies. Another thing you can do is mentor people and bring people along that are the hope of your college for its future generation. Another thing you could do is consider doing something that you don't normally do. If you're a faculty member, taking a brief stint in administration, especially being active in campus governance. If all of us are not more active in campus governance, we're not going to like the results, okay? And so all of us, I think, need to get more involved in this to try to affect some of these changes. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you think? What would you like to talk about? There are microphones, yes. Suzanne is pointing out if you think you could be more heard by moving to a microphone, please feel free to do so. Reactions, comments. This is the audience participation part of this class. Okay?
I have a comment.
Yes, sir. Would you introduce yourself, please, sir?
My name is Jim Pelletier. I'm one of the last original faculty.
This is Jim Pelletier. He's one of the last.
My name is Jim Pelletier. I'm one of the original faculty members of the college.
A founding father, ladies and gentlemen.
No. Frankly, this is a labor of love, and I get paid for it. I thought in one of your sections that, and I instruct astronomy as well as chemistry, but as a nation, as a community, it's necessary for us not just to think of national perspectives, but global perspectives. And in addition, spatial, outer space, macrocosmic spatial perspectives, because there are demands that are being placed on our students now, and some of my students volunteered, by the way, to be passengers, to be participants in the fly around Mars, which is about to take place in 2018. That's a commitment of this college, of this community, of this nation, of this planet, and our students must be prepared to think in those terms. And so that would be one addition to that particular slide that you had in your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So in other words, they've got to be prepared to learn what they need to learn to fulfill their potential in ways that I, for example, could not predict. Correct? Yes. Thank you.
I had a question.
Hi.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Hi, I'm visiting from Northern Essex Community College. They were nice enough to have
Yeah,
us
and I
come
didn't
and
acknowledge
visit.
your institution earlier. I didn't know you were here.
Oh, yeah, we got very lost, so we're here now. But our question is, one of the things we're talking about at our school is making the College Success Seminar, which is equivalent to the FYE, required for everyone, for every student. And we are actually meeting some resistance within our own community at school. What are some of the reasons why you would argue for every student taking the, being required to take the College Success Seminar?
Okay. Everybody understand the question? Okay, let me give you some data on this. Thanks to my wife, Betsy Barefoot, there has been a survey administered every 3 years since 1988, asking a survey distributed to chief academic officers at all accredited 2- and 4-year colleges in the United States on the topic of first-year seminars, college success classes. And one of the questions on the survey has been to ask institutions whether or not they have a required or an elective first-year seminar. The last survey was administered, for which I have data, was in 2009. The 2012 data is not yet finished in its analysis. But the 2009 survey found that just a tad over 49%, it was almost 50%, of the institutions that have a first-year seminar require all students to take that course, all right? So there's an almost perfect even split on this now. Now, the percent of institutions that do require a first-year seminar has been gradually increasing over the past 25 years. And what is leading to that increase, that is the willingness of more institutions to require this course, is the growing body of research that participation in a first-year seminar correlates with enhanced student retention and graduation rates. And that finding is gradually influencing administrators and faculty to adopt this curricular change, okay? Now, when you require a course of all students, you are adding to your curriculum a requirement where this is the outcome. You have the unwilling teaching the uninformed, okay? If you're going to staff another required course, you have to make some people teach that course that might not want to do it. It's very, one of the things that we believe made the first-year seminar so successful in its earlier years was these courses were more likely to be taught by volunteers, people who had chosen to do this, who were more motivated to do this. And unfortunately, what many institutions are doing when they move to required is they're increasing the proportion of these sections that are taught by adjuncts, okay? Now, I don't want to make any blanket generalization here about the role of adjuncts, but I'm going to in this case. I have to, because this is a course that is about the institution. It's about the services and the resources and the people, and for better or worse, many adjuncts don't have the experiential basis in the institution to have the same command of the information as do the permanent faculty. Another problem here is unless this course is owned by the permanent faculty, it's not going to have the status, stature, and recognition that it deserves, okay? Finally, and I hate to report this to you, maybe you don't know it, maybe you do know it, but there's a growing body of research which correlates degree completion with the proportion of credit hours that students earn taught by full-time as opposed to part-time faculty. Okay? And what do you think the finding is, ladies and gentlemen? The finding is that the higher the proportion of credits earned in courses taught by adjuncts, the lower the persistence and graduation rates, okay? All right, now that may be a proxy for lots of other environmental conditions in the college, okay, or university where that's taking place. Okay, it's also a proxy for financial difficulties. There are any number of hypotheses that can be argued, but this course in particular needs to be owned by the full-time faculty, if possible. Okay, so why would you do this though, in spite of those challenges? Well, you do it because you as a college have said that there are certain things that we believe that all students ought to do. What do you want all your students to do besides experiencing your parking and your registration and your food service? Huh? Look at your college catalog and ask yourselves, what do we want all students to do? I mentioned last night to a smaller group here, I am following with great interest an extraordinary experiment rather, to create a new kind of community college. And it's a college called New Community College. And this is in the City University of New York, and they're calling it New Community College until they can find a wealthy donor to name the college for them. And they have one in mind, whose last name begins with a B. Okay, now, what they're doing at this college is they're saying, one of the things we want all students to do in the first year is some form of community service. Okay? What kind of country might we have if we required all students in the first year to do something to serve anybody other than myself? I was 23 years old before my squadron commander sat me down and said, Gardner, you're a smart guy. You have more education in this squadron than anybody but the physicians. You are going to do community service. Why didn't somebody say that to me when I was 17 or 18? Huh? I don't know. They should have, shouldn't they? Isn't that why we're funding colleges and universities? Now, my point here is that why might you want to require this course? Because you could say in this course that there's certain things we believe in as a college, and we're going to make students do those things in that course. Suppose you said, well, in order to increase motivation, commitment to degree attainment, commitment to this institution, we're going to build in a career planning, an intensive career planning module in every section of that course. Because we produce more focused students, they would perform better. You could do that. Suppose you want to do what Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis does in its first-year seminar and says that they think that one of the keys to creating a successful college student in the kind of era that Dr. Pelletier up here was reminding us we live in is that to be successful today, all students have to know how to do three things. They got to know how to find information, evaluate information, and communicate information, right? In any occupation, whether you're an automobile mechanic or an accountant, you have to be able to do those things. So at IUPUI has said that every entering student at that university needs to have, quote, a librarian as consultant. Think of that idea, okay? All right? So they have a librarian consultant in every section of the first-year seminar, okay? Because what they want to do is they want to produce students there who are information literate, okay? You can't function in the 21st century if you're not information literate. So my point is, if you had a required course, you'd be going through an exercise as a college or university and saying, what do we think are the most important things that need to happen to new students? Okay? Not by serendipity, but by design. And you'd build them into that required course. Okay? So there are many valid educational arguments for having this as a requirement.
Can I bring up one point? One of the major obstacles that we're finding is matriculation agreements, working through matriculation agreements that are already established, and adding a 3-credit course might mess up those in some way. The other is the sequester.
Let's deal with matriculation. I think you meant articulation agreements, didn't you? Transfer agreements. Okay, and of course to articulate, you got to be matriculated. All right, so really talking both of them. Okay, folks, 90% of the regionally accredited college and universities in the United States have some form of college success course. So the probability is very high that your students are going to get some form of credit, that's going to be a transferable course. Now, it could be that if you had a 3-credit course and yet they were transferring to some place that had only a 2-credit course, they might get only 2 credits for it. But and as you know, all of you know, there's a big difference between transfer and what credits apply to the degree. Okay? And that's a whole other can of worms. But in terms of just literal transferability, This is not nearly the problem it used to be, because this idea of having a college success course is now so ubiquitous. If you don't have one of these courses, that's really the exception. I mean, who doesn't have them anymore? Now, there are many different types of college success courses, which is another topic. We could talk about that if you want, but they have some type of course. Now, did I get to your other question?
The sequester, because we found out the other day, I'm not sure if I have all my understanding in a row, but the students will need to complete their degrees in 12 semesters. So some of the students who are coming from ESL and working through developmental courses and things like that, adding another 3-credit course, these are just some of the obstacles that people are bringing up at our school.
Well, okay, if that were an argument, then what I would do is I would build into the ESL program an introduction to college, and I'd be using it as a way to, teach the primary language you're trying to teach them, okay?
Okay, thank you.
And that's one of the many types of first-year seminar courses, by the way, which are discipline-based or they're embedded in some other kind of academic program. Good morning.
Good morning. For your knowing, my name is Nancy Lee Wood. I'm a sociologist, professor of sociology here, and I'm the director of the Institute for Sustainability and Post-Carbon Education. This could be a very long discussion, but I've been reading someone by the name of Paul Clark, who's a Britisher, who in his most recent book said something that really touched me. What he said was that all of our education is becoming outdated because it's oriented toward maintaining an industrial society. And what we really need to be doing is developing a sustainable society. The industrial society is not going to be sustainable as we have functioned. And it seems to me that the first-year experience really has to be centered on sustainability. Everything that happens within the first year needs to be oriented toward developing an orientation toward sustainability. And I've been teaching for a very long time, for about 40 years now. I've been here for 17 years. I know that a lot of students really feel that a lot of what they're getting, with all due respect to my colleagues, is just bunk that keeps them going somewhere that they don't know where they're going, and that contributes to the lack of success. And I wonder if you would address that issue.
Well, your question is very provocative. I'm enjoying it. My first response when I listened to you was to tell myself that, John, what you've really been trying to do for your whole career is to make more students self-sustainable, okay? Students can't cope in the kind of world that you're arguing we must become if they cannot sustain themselves, all right? They have to learn the kind of skills of thinking and analysis and criticism and reflection, at least some of them, that you have, in order to be able to cope with that enormous transition that our society obviously has to make, and to deal with the kind of resistance that we're encountering. By the way, your print materials of the college emphasize sustainability more than most all of the community colleges I've ever seen, okay? That was one of the first things I noticed, okay? Now, that's not to say the college, are where you might want them to be. I don't know about that. But on a continuum, that's one of the first things that struck me. But this business about the first-year experience is about creating more self-sustainability. It's, the industrial model that you referenced was designed to produce people to do what they were told, correct? Right? And to function in the classic factory model of production and behavior that vanished from Fall River and went to Lancaster, South Carolina, and now is going to Mexico, okay? And so we need an educational system that is preparing people to work, sustain themselves in very different ways. And that requires a different kind of first-year experience. So yes, I would certainly think that our philosophies are very compatible.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Allison Frisbee. I work at Cape Cod Community College. I'm a full-time advisor, and I also teach college experience. But also for the last 5 years, I've been on the Academic Dismissal Appeal Board. And one of the things that committee that I'm on with, we've been struck by the fact that the number of students that are flunking out that are not students that we would have termed at risk when they started. They weren't on the track for developmental education classes. In fact, they tested really well on their CPTs. And I think you mentioned earlier that you can learn a lot in the dialogue of students who are on academic probation. And some of the things that I've learned that I incorporate into my college experience class came from listening to students who are academically dismissed and what they were struggling with and what really impacted their success at the college are not always the things that we can identify up front. And I think having a discussion sometimes with students who we wouldn't normally associate with being students who might, need a college experience class, all the students need and can benefit from what a college experience class can deliver. Even students that from day one we might think, well, they're going to be successful, they probably don't need this.
I certainly agree with you. I mentioned, I think, in my comments that I wrote a blog piece, I just finished it yesterday, on what I learned from these two groups of students on academic probation, what were the common themes. And I was reminded of that by a conversation I had this morning with one of your colleagues here at Bristol, who's a gentleman who works with veterans. And he was sharing with me in a very poignant way of, asking a veteran, well, what did you do in Iraq? And the veteran would say, well, my occupational specialty was sharpshooter. What does a sharpshooter do in the civilian economy? And this colleague of yours was telling me how he could take that veteran to self-assess what were some of his strengths and abilities and transmit those and translate them into a resume, all right, about thinking, analysis, leadership, etc. Where am I going with this? My finding is that many students on academic probation have overinvested in some area of their lives that is a huge distraction from their academics, okay? Whether it's athletics, family, work, relationship, gaming, whatever. And one of the things these students need is to see that their interests and preferences and their likes and their abilities, that they've never thought about applying those to academic work, could also lead them to be successful in academic work. They haven't made that connection yet. There are other themes. Identity is very central. In one word, students on academic probation are more likely to be less developed in one word, and that's the word purpose. Why am I here with these people at this time in my life? And what is this college doing to help me think about purpose? Okay, and you and your work, I'm sure, are exploring that.
I can tell you that the theme, we use themes at Cape Cod Community College, and the theme for my course is living life with purpose. So hopefully that covers
great.
some of it.
This was not scripted, by the way. We didn't talk earlier. Yeah, thank you.
My name's Kelly Hiller. I teach in the Clinical Laboratory Science department here, and one of the things that I find is that not just from students but faculty, they're kind of looking down on college success. Oh God, it's another stupid class we have to take. I don't want to take this class. I don't want to teach this class. One of the things that I think is a good idea to share is why it actually helped, and I know you've touched on that already, but I teach one of the courses that we have actually integrated a lot of the college success into. I know that's a
It's called the infusion model,
yes,
right?
and it's a whole different discussion. But I found that we've actually been doing that for a long time.
If that was done on a wider basis, you wouldn't need this course. This course is needed because it's not being done elsewhere in the curriculum, okay?
But what we actually have seen, and I've actually personally experienced it myself, I do actually teach online. I teach the phlebotomy program, and we have incorporated a lot of introductory pieces into that beginning course. We have from all different areas to take the certificate program. I actually personally had a student take that. She's actually currently now in the nursing program. And one of the things that she really has stressed upon is the start. She chose phlebotomy to start. She wanted to get a good jumping board to be able to get into the nursing program. And she is a real success story. She actually, I'm 3 days back from maternity leave, and she actually was one of the students that took care of me while I was actually in the hospital. And we have
So
many
you're
of those other
educating your own
students.
caregivers.
Yes, and basically, but she has succeeded, and I've had other students that come and they've drawn my blood, they've drawn my child's blood. It's important to give them that starting block, and her story and my other students' stories are really a perfect example of why something like this is actually needed. But the students that are in those courses and the instructors that are teaching those courses that aren't thrilled need to know those stories. They need to share.
Well, this really is a comment about how, if you have a course like we're talking about, how you internally market that, and you describe to students why you offer it in the first place. Okay, and these students are coming to you because they want to be successful, right? They want to advance their course in life, and some of them have figured out that college is the only ticket to upward social mobility, and that you need to persuade them in terms of the evidence of effectiveness of these courses. Tell them why colleges and universities are doing this, all right? And the most powerful messenger to communicate that message, ladies and gentlemen, is other students. You need to have student leaders making that argument, because they're far more credible than we are, with all due respect to us, in terms of their believability. Thank you very much. I have 1 minute before we yield the floor. Can you give me something to do in 1 minute?
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah, I can do that.
All right?
My name's Nick. I used to be a student here at Bristol Community College and transferred out of here to get a bachelor's degree.
Yeah?
They treated me very well when I was here.
Great.
And I'm glad to be back. So my question is, before you were explaining the importance of honor students as student leaders, and you've been discussing how students have to want to be successful in order to be successful. So I was thinking that while you were going through that, have you ever thought about combining students that are from the honors programs at certain schools and having them be more in the college success seminar, and possibly being assistants or assistant teachers, and maybe if that would influence students more to have as much...
That's precisely what I was arguing. About a third of the first-year seminars in the United States now have some form of peer leader, and the most common source of peer leader is somebody with a Dean's List academic transcript already, and at least half a bachelor's degree or it depends on the type of institution. In community college, it could be 30 credits of successful Dean's List work. So yeah, that's precisely the model that I was advocating. Yeah,
Okay.
And many colleges now offer academic credit to the peer leader. They enroll them for some other course, like a communications course or a group dynamics course there are multiple disciplines where you could offer a student a 3-credit-hour course in which you're teaching them the knowledge and the skills you want them to apply in the laboratory setting, which is the college success course. At my institution, we offer the students a course called The Teacher is Manager, a 3-credit-hour, 500-level course about how people who teach and lead manage others, and those are skills you use in teaching the first-year seminar. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a study that was done in 2001 using the results of the so-called first-year initiative. It's a national benchmarking survey which reports student perceptions of the effectiveness of first-year seminars, and it yields the outcomes are what are called, the basic finding is that students report the greatest learning gains in classes that have the highest levels of what the instrument measures are engaging pedagogies. And there are 3 characteristics of a college success course that yield the highest levels of engaging pedagogies in which the students report they learn the most. The first characteristic is how many credits. 3 credits, higher learning outcomes than 2 credits than 1 credit, okay? Second characteristic of the high-performing course is a course that's not a standalone course, but it's part of a learning community. It's linked with at least one other course, so that the content in the college success class is applied immediately to another college course. The third characteristic is who teaches the course. And the big finding is greater learning outcomes, more engaging pedagogies, if the college success course is co-taught by somebody like you. Okay? A recent or a current college student who's been successful. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to yield the floor. You need to take a break, and thank you. I'm going to be around all day. Look forward to interacting with you. We've got sessions that start in 12 minutes, and so take a fast you-know-what, and we'll see you in the next session, okay? Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, and we'll join John this afternoon at 2:30 for town meeting. Please enjoy your workshops. They'll start at 10:45. For the faculty panel, you can stay put right here. Thank you.